Hello, my name is Lee McClenaghan and welcome to Behind the Words. In this episode, I discuss the notion of theatre horror with the team from the Laudanum project.
The spiralling blue smoke that rose up from Sandrine Moreau's Jetan cigarette lapped at the besmeared windows of the train carriage as the approaching stop of Orléans was announced. Quickly reaching into her valise, Sandrine removed a large dog-eared scrapbook. Its cover had been decorated with cut-out illustrations of flowers and daintily penciled curlicues. Across the front of the scrapbook, in bright pink letters, the words Theatre de Guignol had been inscribed in looped, swooping strokes that coiled in and out of the pasted oriental lilies and petunias.
The human condition is a complex web of extremes. To explore the extremes takes great courage. Melbourne-based theatre company, the Laudanum project, creates narrative-driven performances where the audience feeds on their own notion of horror. Joining us on Behind the Words are Nick Ravenswood and his team to discuss the Grand Guignol Automation, their fourth theatre production. Thank you, Nick.
Pleasure.
Does your theatre style stem from the Le Theatre du Grand Guignol that operated in Paris from 1897?
Well, we share some things in common. Basically, the fact that we're dealing in horror-based storytelling is the main thing. But what the Grand Guignol specialised in was the very realistic portrayal of gore and horror and insanity and all sorts of amazing stuff. And what we do is we rely heavily on words and music to get the story across. And so it's not about, for the Laudanum project with this show, it's not about throwing blood all over the stage and making the people in the first 4 rows wear raincoats. It's about the poetry of it and the music and creating an atmosphere that makes people paint pictures in their own heads and hopefully take it home with them.
She gazed upon the reflection in the mirror. The eyesore, the blot, the insult.
An aspect that I found interesting is that the Grand Guignol literally means the theatre of the great puppet. Let's talk about this notion of puppets. Would you classify yourself as a puppeteer of words?
Yeah, I guess so. I really enjoy the percussive quality that words can have. When it comes to delivering the story, there's a real rhythm that is set up by the different passages that are also really quite intricately stitched together with the music. When the story is really in full flight, I suppose it is a bit puppet-like. I guess it's a great thing to be able to manipulate people's thoughts in that way.
How hard is it to write the plays when the delivery is the key ingredient?
I mean, whenever I write the shows, my character's Alphonse Cheese Probert, so I'm always pausing and going back and sort of testing the dialogue in his voice. I don't share a voice with Alphonse. He's very much his own person, so it's a matter of sort of trial and error with the scripts and seeing if it works with his delivery and his vocabulary and his attack.
Pigalle salon of terror!
Because he spits, he can be quite sort of vitriolic about the whole thing.
Pigalle salon of terror!
There's definitely a sense of anxiety within the walls of the jail. Do you feel that coming in here as a performer?
Look, we've played in a lot of places like this, and although there's a sense of almost trepidation when we're coming in and setting up, we sort of recognise it as just it's a building. But the big difference, obviously, is for the audience. Between the difference between an audience coming and sitting down and watching a Laudanum show in a place like Castlemaine Jail to sitting down in a more sort of traditional venue is that they're on high alert when they first walk in through those doors. They know that they're in a place where there were some really hideous people and some really hideous things happened. The same at Ararat Lunatic Asylum. There's no getting away from the fact that it's heavy. The atmosphere is really, really heavy. And although for us it's a matter of getting in, getting the show up and getting the job done, for other people, they're sitting there in this really unusual setting, watching some pretty unusual things unfold on stage as well. So it's great. It's really good, and it means, you know, there's so much you can do in a space like this to make that atmosphere as confronting and as oppressive as possible.
Mm-hmm. Lovely.
They love it.
Pigalle salon of terror. It was accompanied by a grainy black and white photograph of the alleyway and the dark facade of the theatre.
I suppose because we're not dealing with in realistic horror,
Yeah.
we're a bit more tied to the words and the poetry of it.
Right.
So,
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
thank you.
After the break, we continue our discussion on the Grand Guignol automation with the delightful Robin Womersley. Welcome back to Behind the Words. The key ingredient to the Laudanum project is the soundscape that drives the narrative forward at an alarming rate. Joining us to discuss the musical arrangement is the talented Robin Womersley, aka Lady Sophronia Lickpenny.
Yes, that's not my fault, but yeah, there it is.
Thank you, Robin. You have worked in a multitude of musicals, from large scale to small independent productions. How do you hear the musical composition?
I've approached this, I'm not a composer and I'm not particularly fabulous improviser. In my music world, I'm a sight reader. So you put any piece of music in front of me and I can read it. But I'm not really a creator. So when Nick got me on board with this project, for me, because it's so far out of my comfort zone, is that I tried to draw from the classical world that I did know how to get around. And because we've done our last show, we're set in London, and this one's set in France, Nick and I sit down and talk about the era. And then what I did with this one is I went and found French composers, because we're set in Paris, French composers from that time frame. And even with the last show and the same with this one, I kind of draw on different motifs. So I guess if you're going to say I use a tool, I steal from Wagner in that leitmotif thing, like certain things have a motif to it. So if it recurs during the show, that motif will come back. As the story gets weirder, it'll twist and corrupt. And so I sort of craft it along those lines. And it's been really interesting in just letting go of self-criticism of that's not good or what you're doing's not great or da-da-da, just trying to just roll with the flow.
Yeah.
There's nothing written down, which is frightening for me, but we just kind of freewheel off it and feed it off Nick. So some shows are I would consider fantastic, that was really on the thing, and some of them I was not as happy with, but it's so transient that it's, by the time I get to the show, I can't remember what it was that was good or bad anyway, so just kind of you're just working off feel, which has been really new for me and terrifying in the last show, and sort of a bit more confident with this. It's just trusting that the material you're putting out sounds good, you know, but it's, again, trying to flavour the show.
Fantastic. Sorry. When you're performing on stage throughout the performance, do you feel the audience being moved by the music?
I try not to, in that if I was doing that, it means my eyes off the ball with Nick and the boys, and again, because it's so free form, we're all listening to Nick very intently, and we're also listening to each other, especially Nick on the accordion and Helen on the accordion, shiny Helen.
That cancerous split of a mouth. Those septic, milky eyes with their bruised and pendulous bags.
We try and make sure there's no gaps. So if he's doing something really interesting, I'll just back out of there and do some simple stuff. Or if he's reached a gap point, I'll try and fill. So it's like the three of us are vibing off each other and off Nick. So for me to start mind wandering into are the audience being affected by this, for me and also then it brings the self-conscious back into it for me, and then that takes me to the not so good place. So there's elements in the show where I will, as character, eyeball the audience and just try and be annoyingly disturbing or respond to things Nick's doing, but I still try and operate Sophronia as Nick's puppet. Do you know what I mean? She responds to him and him only kind of thing. I don't know that he knows that. That's my own secret little world.
She had attempted many times over to mask her horrid stink by drenching herself in the contents of her mother's prized bottles of Caron's Tabac Blonde.
Would the performance work without Lady Sophronia Lickpenny?
Of course not.
Absolutely
not. No, the boys have rehearsed without me.
Uh-huh.
And I think they find it really interesting exercise because they're so used to me filling gaps here, there and that when they're not there, suddenly they hear different things. So it's just different. It's not to say that it wouldn't work. We can certainly do the show without the boys if we had to. But obviously that's not the way this show is devised. And it really is, we want all the elements in there because that's how we've built the show and the vibe for the show and the soundscape. So it's kind of a weird thing. It would be a completely different concept, or it'd be a different structure, and it certainly wouldn't be as melodic if you just had the piano and the percussion. If you had a different instrument, again, that might be different. So it's kind of site-specific to our combination. But yeah.
Why do you think that an audience is willing to pay for the pleasure of horror?
Because we live in a very sad, sick little world these days, and people are looking for thrills. But I think what we don't get a lot, and I certainly, because I work as a vocal coach, I work with language, I love text, and I'm hungry for words and that sort of thing, which is why I really love working on these projects, because Nick just puts the most insane, amazing language into these stories. There's times where I don't even know what the word means. I have to go and look it up. But it's, just completely forgot the question.
So did I. I was so into it. I was loving that.
I was getting into it.
Why do you think that an audience is willing to pay?
Okay. Because we want titillation, we want shock value. I think horror's existed as a genre forever, and it's one of those genres that never goes away. Country, cowboy things come and go and get reformatted, but horror has always survived. And the old Edgar Allan Poe and all those wonderful old Victorian horror stuff are still not relevant, but they're still exciting to read today. And people turn them into music. We've got Jekyll and Hyde going at the moment. We've got Edmund Drood coming up at Fed Uni in Ballarat. There's these stories resonate for some reason with people. I don't know why, but I'm happy it does, because we get bums on seats for big mega musical shows, and we also get these kind of projects. And there's an element of kind of cult status, which is we're sort of getting. We'd love it to get more mainstream, because obviously then we can get more play out there and more work. But it's such a specific genre, and people, the more uncomfortable and squirmy you are on this show, the happier we are. If we get someone that just can't stand it anymore and leaves, most performers would be really horrified by that. We delight in that. We scared goths out of the room at one particular venue. I mean, they obviously weren't real goths, but they stayed. But it was like, it freaked you out. Yeah, it does. But it's my mum sat through one of the shows, not happily, but she did it to support me, and she definitely was uncomfortable. This is not my mum's, out of all the projects I've done in the last 25 years, this is my mum's least favourite, just because it's like, how does she show photos of what we look like? This is what Robin's doing. but good on her, she sat through it. But it's hard. It's just amazing language. I love it.
But the smell always returned with a renewed intensity.
Our discussion on the Grand Guignol automation continues after the break. Joining us next are Nick Wilson and Toby Harrison. Welcome back to Behind the Words, where we continue our discussion of the Grand Guignol automation. And please welcome our next guest, Nick Wilson.
Thanks for having me.
No worries. What is your take on the central character, Sandrine Moreau?
Sandrine's a pretty troubled young woman. She suffers from a pretty extreme case of body dysmorphia, and she's completely fixated on the Grand Guignol theatre. So she sort of leaves her country home and goes on this journey to Paris to fulfill this sort of fantasy of both discovering the theatre as a kind of place and her own kind of transformation that she's fixated on over all these years. So it's kind of a big culmination of a, strange, troubled girl.
How important is the inferred horror over actual horror?
In a way, it's all inferred in that it's theatre, and thankfully.
Thankfully.
And I guess with this work, it's all very language-based as well, so it's not, we're not simulating horror, we're not splashing blood around and showing very much, so it's, in that sense, it's all pretty much going on in the audience's head. So in a paradoxical way, it can be a lot more visual for people than seeing it, because you're actually visualizing it yourself through these really sort of descriptive and ornate kind of language that really makes you, I can see a lot of people just kind of closing their eyes and getting really absorbed into the world, just sort of listening to the words and the music, and it's kind of this whole thing. So yeah, in a way, it all is inferred. But that said, the language itself is very, very direct, and it's, it doesn't skirt around what's happening. It's like very literal kind of account. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, it's direct. But at the same time, the fact that it is language as is the medium, it's kind of a really, it's a personal kind of experience of it. I think people get.
By being involved with the Laudanum project, have you noticed any distinct changes with your self-image? I'm more... I didn't really used to be a horror accordion gimp drag queen, so to that degree, Slight modification.
that's a kind of, new experience.
Fantastic.
That wasn't my main... earner before this, so it's been, it's
has that moved into your everyday life? Or?
Not every day, no. We get together in places like this, and it all just comes natural.
Together.
It's a beautiful thing.
Nice. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you.
No worries. And finally, we meet Toby Harrison, aka Barnabas Orrell. Welcome, Toby.
Thanks, nice to meet you.
How do you view your role in the performance?
It's more of a support role, I think. We help with breaking up the scenes in the play, and as well as trying to highlight important moments and building up an environment for the story to go against.
Has the percussion in any of your previous performances ever become at one with the audience? Like you feel like everyone's there together with you?
At certain points in the show, there's definitely the percussion definitely helps build up the suspense and really highlight more of the graphic and visual parts of the show, and help people's imaginations really capture what's going on through the sound of like loud sounds, and also there's a lot of with the percussion and the brass instruments, there's a lot of build up, which is really good for sort of creating more of an impact than there would be if there's none at all, I think.
Yeah. Do you feel certain chemistry between yourself and the audience?
Being blindfolded, it's interesting. You can't see the audience per se, but there's been times when you've heard shuffling and sort of uncomfortability of people in their seats when I'll glance in their direction or where I anticipate their direction to be. And sometimes people are talking, I'll look at them and they'll stop talking, and you can tell that you're sort of making them feel a bit uncomfortable, which is really cool. It's definitely a different aspect when you can't actually see things. The way you perceive things is definitely different in relation to being able to see people. It's definitely given me a different perspective on performing.
What is your transformation process to give light to Barnabas Oral?
It's a lot of makeup, costume, and there's a blindfold. But then also, I suppose, mentally you're trying to... Barnabas is a very simple person. Doesn't really think too much. He thinks everything's fun and happy. So a lot of the time I'm trying to, when I'm preparing and when I'm performing, it's trying to think as different it is to the story, trying to think happy thoughts and smiling, because then that's another sort of aspect that puts people off in a lot of ways and makes them feel very uncomfortable when I'll be smiling, but there's something more gruesome or sad or black sort of going on. So that's pretty much, how I would do it.
Very good. Well, thank you, Toby. Thanks for your time today.
That's right, no worries, thank you.
Thanks for putting up with me.
That's also.
That was the Laudanum Project, and Lee, I believe you saw the guys perform when they toured the show to Melbourne. What did you think?
I did. I went to see them perform the Grand Guignol automation at Grace Darling in Collingwood. And oh my goodness, wow. Nick Ravenswood is the playwright behind the Laudanum Project. And he's such a beautiful man, and his narrative and storytelling and writing is just so unbelievably beautiful, but then gory. So nothing actually gory happens on stage. The makeup, costume, everything is fantastic, but it's all verbal. So everything that you are feeling, your own brain is doing it to you. I actually had to put my head in between my legs because I was feeling so unbelievably faint while listening to this heartbreaking story on stage, but it's quite gory. Obviously, she's mutilating herself and everything. And I was just like, wow, how can the power of the mind, that I was actually feeling nauseous just by listening to a story, is unbelievable. You have to see them. You just have to see them to experience it. I can't explain it to you. If you can get through a show, it's like, did that.
Tick it off your list.
Did that.
Well, on that bloody gory note, that's the end of our episode this week. Thanks so much for joining us on Behind the Words, and we'll catch you next time. Get amongst it.
Take care, everyone. We'll see you soon.
Pigalle salon of terror. It was accompanied by a grainy black and white photograph of the alleyway and the dark facade of the theatre.